And welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, Miami Herald's Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
Much, David. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Last time we talked, the Heat were red hot. What was it? They had won like
9 of 10 or something like that.
10 or something like that. Yeah. 3 straight losses since the last time we talked. Obviously a lot of injuries for the Heat. Jimmy Butler missing, Tyler Hero still missing, but just a nice reminder that
it's a long season.
It's a long season, yeah, and not to get too invested on the week by week narrative that I think is easy to maybe get caught up in sometimes here in this world of not just our NBA podcast, but NBA podcasting in general, where the story changes every week. Well, we'll probably be a relatively quick episode here today. It's the end of November. We're closing in, I guess, on in-season tournament time. That'll pick things like.
There's no. It's not even worth discussing the Heat right now because they're out of the in-season tournament.
Right. Exactly.
So
we're in the real doldrums of the season, waiting for that to happen. And then Christmas, obviously, will be when things really pick back up for the Heat. I guess let's start there. In-season tournament, how disappointed are you that you're not going to Vegas?
Be honest with you, I'm not disappointed because I like to know what the week is going to look like next week. I'm very much just want to know what the week is going to look like, where they're going to be playing. So to get those 2 games that were missing from the Heat schedule last night felt weirdly satisfying. They're going to play in Toronto on Wednesday next week, and then they're going to host Cleveland on Friday. So I'm just glad that I can make my flight reservations. I could tell my family where I'm going to be next week. And yes, but no, it was. I think it was honestly, I was skeptical about the whole in-season tournament thing.
It's been better than I expected.
Yes. Is it perfect? Far from it. But it was better than I thought for sure. Just because I think the courts help, it felt different.
I don't especially as you continue.
I mean, it made the games feel different.
No, I get what you're saying.
All great, no, but I like that they make the games feel different. And as they got deeper into group play, and they were actually okay, this team needs to win to do this, or this team needs to win by this much. It added a different dynamic to those games. So I thought it went well, and then we'll see. Maybe the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals will be even better. I think that's what the NBA hopes, right? Especially when they get to Vegas. So I'm really interested to see how this kind of finishes here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we don't have to do too much in the in-season tournament, but I think it is worthwhile because this is now going to be a fixture. It seems like it has certainly gone well enough that they're going to do this again next year, and they're going to be able to sell these media rights to someone probably, right? It's been a success for the NBA in that regard. I was skeptical. I think a lot of people were just because I didn't know if the players and the teams were going to care, and that's all that mattered, right? Is that they care. Like you see was it the Celtics and Bulls last night where the Celtics were trying to win by 23, I think they needed to win by, and the Bulls were freaking out about them fouling, but I know it's kind of goofy that this team has to worry about its point differential in a game in the end of November, but it's just I think that was the perfect summation of why this worked. And
that's the point of it, right? That's the point.
Because these teams cared, and the players for the most part cared. Obviously there's some outliers. There's 30 teams. I'm sure there are some guys, some guys who sat out games in this, but for the most part, the good players played. They tried hard to win. The coaches coached to win. They lined up rest for the most part. It seems like to not interfere with these games. I'm sure Adam Silver got on teams about this too, that they wanted to, especially in year one, have this feel meaningful. And like you said, now we get elimination games, and it's impossible not for those to feel meaningful, right? If you play pickup basketball and it's winner keeps going, that's lower stakes than these guys are playing for when there's X number of dollars at stake per player. Now the stakes are natural. I was always kind of optimistic about once we got to the tournament play of it, the idea that you could hit a game winner and then you keep playing. Major success for the NBA in year one, and I think having a successful year one is important, not just because I mentioned all the business end of it, but it sets the tone now where Now guys are going to care about this to some extent moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty simple. Like because I question too, like whether players would care. But these guys are all competitors. Like they're all alphas. Like they get to the NBA for a reason. You dangle any kind of carrot in front of them, right? They're gonna compete for it. They can say all they want.
Right. Yeah. I think the concern was like, are guys gonna even play in these games? But for the most part, when NBA players play in games, they're not loafing
around.
Like, they're trying to win. When they're in the actual game, the problem in the NBA lately has been how often are the best players playing? And again, in the in-season tournament, the best guys have been playing for them. I'm sure there have been guys who sat out, but for the most part, it seems like guys have been playing.
Well, the NBA made that a point. Like in the new player participation policy, like national TV games and in-season tournament games were emphasized. So if you were going to miss one of those games, it had to be because of a legit injury.
Right. Exactly. All right, I think that's enough on the in-season tournament because, as you mentioned, the Heat not
until
playing.
Next year.
Disappointment? Is it a disappointment for the Heat that they're not playing?
I don't know. I mean, Kyle Lowry was asked about that last night, and he's like, "Yeah, it sucks. Like, I wanted to be going to Vegas." And I think there's some truth to that, right? Like, you're in it, you want to win it, right? You want to win the inaugural tournament. That'd be kind of cool to say. But I also think that he just wanted to beat the Bucks last night. Like, it didn't because if they would have beaten the Bucks by 2, they wouldn't have gotten into the quarterfinals. Right. But I think they would have been happy with just a 2-point win.
Right. Exactly.
I think it was the more disappointing thing is you're on a 3-game losing streak. You played well against Milwaukee, probably well enough to win, especially offensively. Mm-hmm. But again, down the stretch, the Bucks took control. So I think that was more the disappointment last night.
I like the idea that a team could go for, in soccer they have the treble, right, where you win your Premier League, in England the Premier League, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. I like the idea of like an NBA team that could like win the finals, win the NBA Cup or whatever the hell we're calling it, and like have the best record in the regular season. Like, it's a nice thing you could say. Oh, like we're one of the great teams of all time if we do that.
Those cups is it against different teams over there?
Yeah, so that's obviously the different Champions League.
That's what makes
that's weird. The problem. Yeah, that's always been my problem with it. Is like, I don't know, like throw some Euro League teams in or whatever. But the problem obviously is that the NBA is so far ahead of every other league. But we don't need to like relitigate the idea of the in-season tournament.
Let's just make it an in-season tournament episode.
I'm fascinated by it because I was so skeptical about it and out on it, and like I said, it's been an unmitigated success. Like it has been, it hasn't been perfect as you mentioned, but like it's a like I was expecting it to like be a D, and it has been at least like a B plus. Probably even like an A, basically.
It's gonna get better.
They've been the most compelling regular season games, like in terms of like people, when those games are happening, people are tweeting about them or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's gonna get better. This is probably the worst it's gonna be. The first year usually is, right? Like there'll be different tweaks next year that'll make it a little better and years to come. So I think there's definitely potential. I didn't really see it at first. I was like, why? And part of me still is kind of like, why? But I now I get it. After kind of going through it and covering these games, I get it. I get what they're trying to do.
Anyway, now that we're done talking about something that the Heat is not involved in, let's talk about the Heat 3-game losing streak. As you mentioned, lose in Milwaukee on Tuesday night. We're recording this Wednesday evening. As I said, last time we talked, the Heat were red hot. 3 losses in a row now, but you came on with a take before we started recording that it's actually you're encouraged by the Heat's 3-game losing streak here. Why?
Yeah, that's me, Mr. Sunshine Pumper. I see the good in losing streaks. No, but honestly, like the Bucks game in particular.
Yeah.
On Tuesday
I think it's hard to feel good about that Knicks game.
Yeah, that Knicks game. Look, one way you can look at it is 99% of the time the Heat win that game. Like they were up by 20 points in the third quarter, up by 18 points, like 10 minutes left. Like NBA teams, I know teams come back all the time now, but still 18 points in the fourth quarter. 9 out of 10 times you're winning that game. They blew it obviously with a terrible fourth quarter, one of the worst fourth quarters in a while for them. But they played well enough to get to that point. Like they were playing really well. So there was for the most part during that game, they played good enough to win. Brooklyn, let's say you throw it away with a second out of a back-to-back. Jimmy's out. Bam is out. Duncan is out. Like Tyler's out. What do you expect, right? They lose that game by 15 points. But the Bucks won there were a lot of good things that happened. I mean, you're playing without Jimmy and Tyler, two of your top three players. You're playing without Haywood Highsmith, so three starters are out. Mm-hmm. And you still find a way to make it a really competitive, fun game. I mean, there were 18 lead changes, 19 ties. The Heat were up, I think, with 3 minutes left before the Bucks came back. The Bucks had pretty much all their entire team available. Chris Middleton, Giannis, Dame was available, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis. They had their guys in there, and the Heat, I mean, they played toe-to-toe with them. So that's encouraging, right? Because you'd like to think, it's one game. You'd like, if Jimmy and Tyler are playing, they probably win that game. Offensively, they were really good. They got to the rim against the Bucks, which they haven't been able to do really in mm-hmm. Since this core of the Bucks team was put together. They've struggled against their length and their kind of drop defense of just getting to the rim and getting to the paint. And then there were just contributions all around, again, showcasing the depth of this roster. Jay Rich played really well.
Yeah.
20 points. Obviously, Bam did what he did, 31 points. Duncan, 13 points. He took Giannis off the dribble one time and made a layup. It was kind of crazy. Kyle Lowry's playing really good basketball, 21 points on 10 shots. Jaime Jaquez continuing. They had 6 guys in double figures, and that's without 3 starters.
So 6 guys in double figures, only like 8 guys played or something like that.
Yeah, 8 guys played. So just they were encouraging. There were things to like. Defensively, they were not good. The Heat were bad on defense. But again, this is one of the best offenses in the league, and you're
missing 2 of your 3 best defenders, 2 of your best defenders.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a 3-game losing streak. The Heat are 10-8. Now it puts pressure on them to they play the Pacers now. The next 2 games, they host the Pacers in one of those 2-game sets in Miami, and the Pacers are playing well. So there's some pressure on the Heat to end this skid before. You want to get back to 500 after the success you had the last few weeks. But I think you look deeper and you see some positive things going on.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go too deep on like Jaime Jaquez or Duncan Robinson, because I think last week we kind of went pretty extensive on those 2 guys, but they've been, I think as we said last week, they're in some ways they're the biggest reason the Heat is where they are right now, right? Because they've made up for. Those 2 guys have kind of made up what you lost in, obviously doing it different, like they're different players, but made up for a lot of what you lost with Strus and Gabe Vincent leaving, like those like 5th, 6th type guys, right? You mentioned Kyle Lowry, who I think is we've not talked a lot about. I think we've been a relatively pro Kyle Lowry podcast over the years here. Obviously, there have been times over the last couple of years where it was impossible to be pro Kyle Lowry because it was pretty ugly at various points, but this kind of reminds me of when they first got him, basically like the first 2 months of that year, right? Like through November. I think he got hurt in December. That was the December where everyone got COVID, right? I think. And
he went out because of personal reasons.
And he was out for personal reasons. But those first like 2 months, he looked like exactly kind of what the Heat, I think, wanted him to be when they got him. Now the problem is just we haven't seen that for more than extended stretches, but right now he's kind of giving them that, right? In terms of he is a point guard who can be your point guard, but he's also a good enough 3-point shooter that he can play off the ball and just like a connector, right? Like that's what they want him to be more than because of how often Jimmy, and obviously Jimmy was out, but because of how often Jimmy and Bam and Tyler, when he gets back, have the ball. And this was the plan even when they got Kyle Lowry, right? I don't think they ever thought he was going to be a guy who was going to bring the ball up 80% of the time. But he's been kind of exactly what I think the Heat have kind of hoped he would be. Obviously, he's not as good a player as he was that last year in Toronto now, just because he's older. But I think he's like filling that need that they need. And I think people are kind of acknowledging it that so far he's been good. I mean, obviously the question is he going to look like this in the playoffs? That's been the question every year he's been with the Heat. But for now, he's given them kind of exactly what they need.
Yeah, he's putting shots up too. I mean,
that's the other thing. I mean, so a lot of his struggles the last couple of years have been that the 3-pointers just disappeared for him, which he was always a very good 3-point shooter. And I don't know what his percentages have been.
45% on threes.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know what his career number is, but I would guess when he was in his prime, it was
37, 38
yeah, like
probably.
high
Yeah.
30s, touching
Yeah.
to 40 every once in a while. And yeah, his first 2 years in Miami. Last year he was 34%, 34.5%, which is not very good for a guy who's supposed to be one of the better shooters on the team.
Yeah, and I think people forget last year, like he was hurt. Like
Yeah.
he played through an injury, and that cost him. He had to miss extended time because of that, because he tried to play through it. And then even when he came back, he was like on a minutes limit, playing off the bench. He just wasn't himself. This year, you're seeing him healthy, and you're seeing, Eric Spoelstra has been very adamant about, like, we need Kyle to be aggressive. We need him to put shots up. Like, you can't just take two shots. He needs to be a weapon for this offense to be good enough to compete at an elite level. He needs to put up 5, 6 threes a game. He just has to, especially just like, you don't have many volume 3-point shooters on this roster, and he's one of them. Like, he should be putting up at least 5 3-pointers a game, especially when he's shooting at 45%. Is that going to continue all season where he's shooting close to 50% from three? Probably not. But if he can, shoot 37, 38% on 6 attempts a game, I mean, that's really good. Especially, if he can also give you 4 or 5 assists a game, which he's averaging with 1 turnover. He's going to take charges. Like, Kyle's 37 years old. There's not much more you can ask from him at this point. So I think his play has been really encouraging. My question with Kyle is, can this continue when the team is fully healthy? Because we've seen him in a starting lineup with Tyler and Jimmy and Bam, where then he just becomes a bystander,
right?
takes 3 shots a game, and just the impact just isn't felt as much. That's going to be the challenge for him. He's going to have to find a way to still get up. Maybe not 10, 12 shots a game, but again, 4 or 5 threes a game, 7, 8 field goal attempts a game. He has to be a consistent threat for this offense because he's too good not to be on the end of the court.
It's interesting. Obviously, the sample size is small right now, but he's taking fewer. It doesn't feel like it, right? But he's taking fewer shots per game and per 36 minutes this year than he did last year. But still, like, you look at his last year in Toronto, he averaged 13.4 field goal attempts per 36, 7.4 3-pointers per 36 minutes, shot 39.6% from three. Obviously, when he came to Miami, we knew those numbers were gonna dip a little bit. He went from being, really, I guess, the number 2 guy there, or co-2, right? It was like him, Van Vliet, Pascal, Siakam. None of them were like kind of a true number 1. So, more shots to go around. 2, when he came to Miami, he was slid into number 3,
and now he's 4th.
And now he's 4th. So like he's never going to get back to those numbers he had his last year in Toronto, but it's that wasn't that long ago, and he can be closer to that, I think. Like when he's at his best, I think he's still going to be a little closer to that than he is during some of the, like you're saying, those games where he would be like 1 for 4 from the field and like over 3 from 3. Like that was just, like, I know he does more. Like he's still a pretty good defender. He's like I said, a connector. Even the assist numbers aren't there, he's like a valuable like 5th guy to have on the floor. But you got to be more than that, because that's what can elevate this team. And again, like, I know that 45% from 3, he's just not gonna do that probably. But if he's a lot closer to 37, 38, and like I said, that last year in Toronto, he shot almost 40% from 3. If he's closer to that's huge for this team too. And another way to make up for some of like what they lost with Strus and Gabe Vincent, obviously.
Yeah, and lately, like, I know he's putting up less shots per 36 minutes this year, but some of that is skewed just because of the start of the year. Like he took
that's
1 shot in the first game,
so those
7
first
shots,
like 10 games or whatever, like they're weighing heavily right now. But over this last stretch,
he's been much more aggressive. Yeah, and I think also the metrics have kind of tell you his impact too. The Heat are outscoring teams by 3.9 points per 100 possessions with him on the court, and they've been outscored by 2.6 points per 100 possessions when he's off the court. So yes, and a lot of his minutes are with Bam and Jimmy, so there's something to that. But still, like, his minutes have been positive. So that's another good sign. So Kyle's been, again, there's been so many guys that are just better than last year.
Yeah.
And he's one of them. Even though at this age, it's just that he's healthier, so he looks more like himself.
Right. The other guy, but we're going to spend a lot of time, I think, talking about Bam. But one other guy to shout out, I guess, is Josh Richardson. We got kind of the first Josh Richardson game on Tuesday. It kind of felt like, right? But what would 7 assists? That was kind of, I think, the standout thing from him. We know he can score. We know he's an athlete and all that kind of stuff. Is any obviously again, no Jimmy, no Tyler. That role is not going to exist for him the next time the Heat play, right? Like if Jimmy's back on the floor. What did you see anything from what he did against Milwaukee that you think is like kind of I don't know, illustrative of what he can continue to give this team?
Yeah, I mean, is he going to have the ball in his hands as much? Obviously, when these guys are healthy, no, right? But he can hit threes. That's important for this team.
Mm-hmm.
He took 7 3-point attempts against Milwaukee. He could create when he needs to, which again, because the point guard depth is so thin, especially with Drew Smith out for the season, they might need him to play some point guard during certain stretches.
Kind of like the backup. I mean, they play so many guys with ball handler, but he's kind of the backup point guard now.
Pretty much, yeah. He has 7 assists and 0 turnovers, so that's good. But the one thing that sticks out to me is he picked up Damian Lillard full court the entire game.
Yeah.
And the Heat, I mean, the Heat love that stuff, right? Like you need to do that to be able to fit in their system pretty much as a guard.
That was like the Gabe Vincent thing last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, like, he kind of I mean, they're different. Like, he's taller, he's longer than Gabe, somewhat different skill sets, but it's almost like that Gabe Vincent role of like, all right, you're gonna throw Josh on whoever's the best guard, Jalen Brunson, Damian Lillard, and just annoy him and tire him out. So in the fourth quarter, he's just not the same guy. And Josh has shown that to be that guy for this team so far. So that's something that will continue. Even when the roster's healthy, he's going to be one of those guys that Spo throws on, the top guards in the league to just tire them out and play them, pretty much all the way up and down the court the entire game.
Yeah, you just got to give him something on the other end too, right? That was that's the key to Gabe Vincent's last season was anyone. I don't want to say anyone, but a lot of guards in the NBA could do the defend another guy full court for an entire game. The thing that makes you a valuable, and for the Heat, like a starter on a finals team, was you have that sort of defensive impact. And again, that's a very specific defensive job. But you need to be able. Gabe also was a knockdown 3-point shooter at various stretches last year, including a lot of the postseason. And so, like you mentioned, Josh Richardson shoots it pretty well. Can give them a little bit of creation. He's just got to kind of carve out what he's going to be on offense, but he certainly has the ability to. He's every bit as talented, I think, as Gabe Vincent, and he's just going to be a different player on the offensive end.
Yeah, for sure. And I think at first it was a slow start for him because he was coming back from injury.
Yeah,
he had the foot injury that kind of limited him in the preseason. I think he missed the first 2 or 3 games of the regular season. And also, I think he's just trying to find his role back with the Heat because it is a complex role where sometimes he's playing point guard with the ball in his hands, sometimes he's playing off the ball. So it's and it varies between the different units he plays in. So it is a little bit of an adjustment for him. But I think the last few weeks, it's not even just last night. This last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, he's been playing a lot better. And again, that's enough. I mean, I don't mean to be super positive here on a 3-game losing streak, but there are a lot of positive things that are happening. You see how everyone kind of fits. And when this team is, if they're ever close to full health, they should be pretty good. They really should be pretty good.
The depth, like you said, is kind of showing itself. It's also the other thing, I know Josh Richardson got off to a slow start. Sometimes guys just have a crappy week, and it happens to happen at the beginning of the season, right? It's a long season. Again, that's why you can't just make judgments on teams right away, because every role player comes and goes. How much is our perception of Gabe Vincent kind of changed because he got hot right when Kyle Lowry got hurt last year, right? He was a terrible 3-point shooter for the first half of that season, and then Kyle went out and he got red hot, and all of a sudden he's got this job kind of locked up, and they never even put Kyle back in the starting lineup. Sometimes just the ebb and flow of a season, it's serendipitous a little bit.
We can overreact to different ebbs and flows too. So
exactly. That's what I'm saying. Especially early in the season when, it's the baseball thing of it's really when you start off 4 for 20 or something to start the year, and you get that 200 batting average displayed on the scoreboard. It feels a lot worse than a 4 for 20 slump in the middle of the season after you've already built your batting average up to 290 or something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's also because it's like the only thing we've seen so far, right?
And
So
especially when it's a new guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's wrap up with Bam, because every time we come on here, it feels like we've got like a new career milestone to talk about with Bam. Last night is one I think Heat fans really liked. Career high 27 field goal attempts. That's what we've been asking for forever, right, Anthony?
Yeah, I feel like people have been asking Bam to shoot for the last 4 or 5 years to shoot more, and he did it last night, and he's been doing it more lately. Like, I think that's the biggest thing about
that's
this
the thing.
season.
It's not an outlier, right?
Yeah, it's not an outlier. 27 shots. Obviously, Jimmy and Tyler were out, so someone needed to take 20 plus shots, right, to make up for all that. And Bam was that guy, and as he should be. 13 of 27. I mean, 27 shots is a lot of shots. And he went to the free throw line 7 times as well.
What was his previous career high?
It was 25.
23 was his previous high this season.
Yeah, he shot 20. He took 25 shots in game 1 of the finals last year when the Nuggets, I don't know if you remember, but they were like playing off of him, kind of daring him to shoot that mid-range shot. He took 25 shots that game. So this is his new career high of 27, which he's never done before. And yeah, he shot a little under 50%, but I mean, he did this while not only being defended by Giannis most of the night, but he also defended Giannis on the other end pretty much.
And he had 5 assists, right? And
two blocks, 10 rebounds. He played 42 minutes.
Yeah.
And by the way, he missed the previous 2 games because of a hip injury, so he wasn't even 100%. There aren't many guys who could do that. There's maybe a handful of guys, and he was playing one of them, Giannis, who could guard the best player on another team while also carrying the offensive load on the other side of the court. Like, there just aren't many guys who can do that. So Bam is special. We know that. But I think the one thing that's really stood out this season is, like, part of me thinks like the whole story of like his offensive growth is kind of overblown a little bit, because I don't think he's honestly that improved from like a skill standpoint. I think it's his approach. He's just more aggressive consistently. Like, he's taking more of these shots and like not looking to pass as much.
Yeah.
Because he has more confidence in his offensive game, which is a good thing. And because he knows this team needs him to be like that. So I think it's more the mindset, the approach that has changed with Bam more than anything on the offensive end of the court.
Yeah, and you covered Bam his entire career, I think, right?
Yeah, his entire career, yeah.
Is he, I mean, you know him pretty much as well as anyone in the NBA media then. Like, do you like see that kind of mindset stuff that is easy to like kind of talk about, right? And just look at the numbers and say, oh, he's more aggressive. His mindset has changed. Do you notice different things with him, either talking to him or just his body language on the court? Like, does he feel different in that regard too?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the past he would talk about, well, you know, it's tough because this team needs me to facilitate too, and I'm trying to find the right middle ground. And like last night, he was asked about just his growth on offense and what's been the biggest adjustment. And he actually said it. He said, this is quote, shoot the ball. I feel like that's been my evolution. Sounds very simple, but I came into this league as a defender, and then to this and then to this point, I'm taking 27 shots. So I feel like the progression has just been shoot the ball and worry about everything else later. When 3-4 years ago, even 2 years ago, you would never hear Bam say that, right? Like, he just wasn't that type of player yet. But I think we saw this starting last year a little bit. He was becoming more aggressive, kind of, you know, made an all-star game, was putting up bigger offensive numbers. But this year, he's taking it even to another level. He's averaging career highs in points, career highs in shot attempts. I don't know if it's a career high in free throw attempts. I don't think it is, but it's close. Career high in minutes. It's just all across the board. Like, his production is up because he's being more aggressive on offense and looking for his own shot.
Yeah, the Jimmy Butler has like beaten him down over the years, I think, right? He's finally gotten him to
take on that
as much as he would like. And you know, his assists are up too. Like, it's kind of obviously like you shoot more. The assists, like, you would think aren't going to be there as often, but you get the ball, like when you're aggressive like that, you have the ball in your hands more. You command more attention, and you know, like, it's the idea of like the pass first player, I think, is such like an idealist like way to think about basketball, and it's kind of like outdated, right? Like
Yeah.
there's not a single pass first. Like even Jokic, he averages
Draymond maybe.
Yeah, like, and again, those guys are not as good of offense. Like Draymond is not as good an offensive player. Like Jokic, who you would think is the most pass first player in the league, he's not. He scores 30 points a game. Like,
Right. He's gonna score first. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can get your assists if you score because of the way the defense has to respond to you. And obviously, when you score a lot, it means you get the ball in your hands a lot. And is he ever going to talk what he averaged? He had back-to-back years. The first All-Star season, he was over 5 assists a game. He's probably never going to touch that again. But
he has that though. He has that in his bag.
He has triple. He had a triple double. I think we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. But he doesn't have to do that again. Like he proved it. It's like the Wilt Chamberlain thing, right? Where 1 year he decided he wanted to lead the league in assists. Like, bam, you showed it to us. They'll score a bunch.
You can do it, not score it. Yeah, not shoot the ball. And I think you made a good point of teams are now, like, especially the last few weeks or so, they're sending more doubles consistently at him. It used to be just like on the roll they would send an extra defender. But like now he's just like in the mid post and teams are throwing a second defender at him, trying to force the ball out of his hands. And that's why you've seen the assists kind of go up recently in the last few weeks because teams are doing that more. So that's going to be something that it's going to be an adjustment for him. There might be some games where it doesn't look so good. Yeah, because this is something new, but this is good for the Heat's offense, right? You need a guy who could draw consistent doubles. Like that should be a good thing.
Obviously, Jimmy does that in the playoffs, but honestly, for the last, I don't even know how long, they've never had that. Like in the regular season, like people don't double Jimmy in the regular season usually.
Right.
Like you'd have to go back to I don't even know LeBron.
Wade, I mean, they'll trap Tyler Hero occasionally, but like just sending doubles at a guy.
Yeah, right. You'll trap a guy who's uncomfortable with the ball or whatever. But yeah, like a double for a guy because he's killing you on offense. Like it's just not been the game plan at all.
That's a good development. It's gonna take a little bit maybe to adjust for the offense and for him, but that should be a good thing long term for this offense. If he can continue to draw doubles because it opens up so much for other guys. So I think that's something to watch for. But yeah, I think Bam, I mean, he's well on his way to becoming an all-star for the third time in his career. I don't know if
at this point he's like, I mean, we're still a lot of time left, but it feels like he's pretty much a lock to be an all-star this year the way he's playing.
Yeah, I would think so. And then All-NBA, it's tough because I think it's positionless this year for the first time, so that makes it tougher for him.
Defensive doesn't mean the center's so stacked, like probably still does because that third center.
There's so many good wings, and there's so many good wings too. So it's just tough. But I mean that matters to him this year because he's eligible if he gets on an All-NBA team or Defensive Player of the Year, or I guess MVP. I think he's
MVP.
Right, I don't think he's an MVP. So like it's either All-NBA or Defensive Player of the Year. He will be eligible for the Supermax, and that's a big deal. So I'm sure he's not. Like that's not the number one thing on his mind, but I'm sure that plays a role, right? That would be.
He's got to be pissed about the change in the All-Star, the All-NBA.
I know. As soon as it was like his year, right?
I know.
That's tough. That's tough. But no, he's been awesome, and again, just so many guys are just playing a lot better than they did last year, and that's kind of why I think the first month of the season has been such an encouraging and honestly gone better than I thought it would. Considering how many road games this team had, I didn't think this, I thought it would kind of be a struggle early on. But even with a 3-game losing streak, they're sitting at 10-8 with, two more home games coming up. So we'll see what happens.
All right, Anthony, you got anything else before we get going?
One more thing about Bam. It is a mouthful, so give me a second. But this kind of shows you how good he's been playing. How about Bam is on pace to become the 8th different player in NBA history to average at least 23 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game while shooting 52% or better from the field in a season. The others in that list, Giannis, Jokic, Embiid, Will Chamberlain, Larry Bird, Charles Barkley, and Kareem.
Probably heard of some of those guys.
Yeah, I think those probably all 8 of those guys will be Hall of Famers or are Hall of Famers or will be Hall of Famers. So,
not just that like they're like top 40 players in the history of the league, pretty much all of them. Yeah. Except for like, did you say Embiid? Was he on that list? He's not quite.
Embiid is on the list, and not. I mean, most of those guys aren't as good a defender as Bam. Maybe half of those guys aren't as good on the other end of the court. So just really, I mean, I think people forget Bam averaged 6 points a game in his rookie year. He was not a scorer. That's not his natural. That's not what he is naturally. But he's developed into a good enough scorer where he is a top 20 offensive player, top 25 offensive player in this league, just because of his development, his growth on the end. So that's a credit to him, a credit to Heat player development. Just a really cool story to kind of see what he's grown into.
Every year, his numbers have like pretty significantly improved on the offensive end.
Yeah.
I mean, the year he was an All-Star for the first time, he jumped from like again, like really defensive role player to, and I know that year he was not like a juggernaut on offense, but you know, he was an All-Star mostly because of his defensive play and that was the year he had a ton of assists, but you know, his offensive game came out of nowhere in some ways that year, and he has not stopped improving like for a single moment. And at this, you know, he's still young enough where he's probably got a couple more years where he's going to just keep getting better before he like kind of hits his plateau in his prime. Anyway, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Unless you have any thoughts on Jimmy Butler going to Sioux Falls to watch Nikola Jokic. I don't think we talked about that last week.
He actually didn't go to Sioux Falls. He went to
going to the
Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Yeah.
No, it was like, you know, I took a little private jet from Chicago, like probably a half-hour flight to Wisconsin. Went to see Nico that night, sat courtside. Went back to Chicago, played the next night against the Bulls. This is a cool thing for Jimmy to do, you know, on his downtime. And he could have been in Chicago having a nice dinner, but he went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and took in a fun G League game. So yeah, just as a team leader, as the best player on the team, just a cool thing for him to do with his downtime.
You ever been to Oshkosh?
I have not, but I feel like I've been to like a store or I've had kids.
There was like a brand
before when I was a kid.
Oshkosh Bagosh.
Yeah, come on, we all wore that growing up, right?
There we go. Oh, from Oshkosh. Oshkosh Bagosh is from Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Of course. I don't know if that brand is still.
I don't know if it still exists either. And Wikipedia says it is an American children's apparel company, so it appears to still maybe exist.
Cool. Well, it used to be popular when we were kids. So I don't know if it's popular now.
All right. That's as good a place to end it as any. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. He will not be going to Las Vegas. But he is happy to have his schedule set.
I'll be in Toronto the next week, though. So there's that.
All right. There you go. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. Yeah, we'll be back next week. Football season's over, so I'm locking in even more on basketball season now than I have been. Obviously with the Canes done, although this is gonna be a very fun Saturday of college football. I know this is not a college football podcast, but
they always suck you back in. As soon as you think you're done with football, they just suck you back in.
Well, and you know, my Eagles are keeping me very preoccupied these days. So, yeah, that sounds, you know, still going, but I've been very much enjoying watching a little bit more basketball these days as football kind of winds down. So anyway, thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.